Okay, everybody, welcome to the Eaglet Eye webinar this evening called New Corneo-Scleral OrthoK from Data to Design. And tonight we're featuring a new lens that's on the market called NewVision, and it's by AccuLens. We have a lot of attendees tonight. A lot of people are still checking in right now. So I think we're going to have a really, really good program. And for the moment, it looks like maybe the person that wins the award for being the furthest away is, I think you say Dr. Kyriakos from Cyprus. Is that correct? So he might win the award for being the attendee that is the furthest away from the U.S. where we're holding this webinar. So again, it's going to be a good program, and I think we're going to learn a lot. And I hope everybody that's in the United States that celebrates Thanksgiving had a nice Thanksgiving weekend with their family and loved ones. So tonight we are really fortunate to have Dr. Aaron Wolf with us. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Optometry, a fellow of the Scleral Lens Education Society. He's also recently became a fellow of the International Association of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. He's the owner of the Austin Optometry Group, Austin, Texas. And he believes he's the first doctor in Texas to earn all of those fellowship, and which I think is really terrific. So definitely a student of the art, and therefore an expert. He's served as a product development consultant, an IRB research participant, and as a key opinion leader for numerous companies and so on. So, Dr. Wolf, it's a real pleasure to have you here, and he's got a great group of slides. We're also very fortunate to have Steve Koger here. And for those of you that don't know Steve, he's a fellow of the Contact Lens Society of America. He's a licensed optician, and he's a design consultant for AccuLens. He works at a practice a couple days a week with his ESP, so he's very, very familiar with the device as an expert. And then he's a consultant for AccuLens, and he's the designer of several of the algorithms that AccuLens uses, and that is why he is speaking tonight, because he's ultimately very familiar with the NewVision lens. So the agenda tonight is we're going to talk about corneo-scleral profilometry, eye surface, and the eye surface profiler. I'll take care of that. I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk about the NewVision corneo-scleral OrthoK lens. And then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Wolf to talk about his case reports and some tips and tricks that he has up his sleeves that for successful specialty lens fitting. So first, let's talk about the eye surface profiler. It's a corneal-scleral topographer. It measures the whole cornea, limbus to limbus. We can get up to 20 millimeters of the sclera and sometimes even further in diameter. Fast, single shot, no extrapolation, no stitching of images together. You get the raw corneal and scleral data is height data, and then we convert that using Fourier transformation into the data points that we use for analyzing the sclera, the cornea, and lens fits. It's really comprehensive analysis software. We have one camera, two projectors, and we get about 500,000 data points. We're accurate to 2 microns at the cornea and about 10 microns in the sclera. So we're trying to streamline the whole fitting process. That's really the magic of this device and what we're trying to offer the people that use it, our customers. We take a scan, and from that scan, we quickly analyze the data. And then we use a first lens fit algorithm to convert the data into the algorithm that a lens company uses that they would typically use. And in some cases, if we don't have a first lens fit algorithm with a lab, we can export the data to their software that is resident on your computer. So there's a couple labs that work that way. So that's the third element, is to get the lens fit and then to send it directly to the lab so that you can fill it. And in many, many cases, we're sending the entire data file. So the lab sees exactly what you're seeing. They have our software and they can see what you're seeing. To take a scan, in a sort of a simplistic explanation, we lubricate the eye, then you instill the fluorescein into their eye. They sit back forward into the chin rest. You make sure the eyelids are open quite wide, and Dr. Wolf has great advice on that. Make any final adjustments, and then you fire and take the image. And this happens when you're experienced, this happens very quickly. And so I'm going to show you this right now in this movie. They're doing a little final alignment, open the eyelids, lower lid down, upper lid up, final alignment, and then they take the image right about there. And really briefly, we're aligning on these Purkinje reflections, and then you see a couple little snowballs here, one over the other. That is our focus. Here's a picture that's a little updated from the video, because now we have a second vertical bar with two little circles on it that help you align the focusing snowballs. And we have these quality control indicators at the top where we show what, how we feel about the focus, how the software feels you did in terms of focusing, centration, and what kind of coverage you got. So this is really handy to help give you guidance as to how good the image is. And we typically are taking up to 3 images, sometimes even more. I know Dr. Wolf takes more. The next thing you see is this the Fourier transformation type of I could say great. And this is actually pretty handy because it sort of gives you an indication as to how well the eye was instilled with fluorescein. And from that, we get the data. And this is an image of basic image of the data. And you can see here's the cornea right here. And then you can see this very irregular sclera. And that could impact the way something fits in OrthoK, which we're going to get to. This is a great quote from Hilary Mason, who's a data scientist, and she's also the founder of East Forward Labs. Data is a tool for enhancing intuition. So many of you are artists when you're fitting specialty lenses, and we're giving you data to make you much, much better. And what's the difference? The difference of having more data. On the left here, you see placida topography, and it's a very, very handy tool to have in the office, no question about that. But you can see in this particular image that even this image doesn't get the entire cornea. Typical alignment curve is 8 to 10 millimeters, and it might depend on the topographer you're using. But over here, when we have the full eye, you can see that we go from, taking the image to this beautiful map, two-dimensional map of the cornea and the sclera. Full cornea, no extrapolation, and our instrument is far enough back that you're not getting shadow from the nose or from eyelashes. So the question is, can using real elevation data, because we're measuring height of the peripheral cornea, reduce the number of refits and chair time? So we looked into that. We did a study of 28 patients, and the goal was to look at the correlation between the peripheral cornea shape and the central K readings. Method 1 was central K readings plus calculation with the online CRT calculator that Paragon has. So the Paragon CRT calculator. Method 2 was corneal-scleral measurements with the ESP using the first lens fit algorithm, which we have worked on with the fine folks at Paragon, and using SAG values. And so this is an example of the CRT calculator over here on the left, where you fill in the calculator with the data that you've gotten from your K readings and other instrumentation to arrive at something that you would send on to Paragon to create a lens for you. And here you see part of the software of the ESP, where we have the pull down menu where you've selected Cooper Vision in this case. The Paragon CRT, we offer several different Jessen sizes, the diameter. And here is where the device and the analysis of the image has already preloaded and calculated the return zones and landing zones and the best fit curve. And then you can put the refraction down here. And from this, you're ready to send something to Paragon. Now, the result is, if you look at these first two columns, LZA1, LZA2, using the CRT calculator, you can, and then over on the right, but you can see, how they had to flatten how many degrees, how many times they had to flatten how many degrees. And so it's like the lens prediction versus the final fit. And you can see the difference here between using the ESP. So the ESP, over half the time, they were needing no adjustment in LZA1 or 2. And the remainder of the time, they were doing some adjustment, flattening maybe 1 degree in LZA1 and LZA2 versus what you had to do with the CRT calculator. So it just shows that in this particular case, in comparing a K readings and a CRT calculator versus the ESP, the ESP would result in many more accurate first fits, and saving chair time, saving patient time, and resulting in greater patient satisfaction, and of course doctor satisfaction. So what we figured out from this particular poster and this little study that we did was that CK readings are not good predictors of peripheral shape of the cornea, and using SAG values can lead to empirical algorithms that really achieve a higher first lens fit success rate. So we have the device, we get a scan, we take an image, and we have data, and we have developed a special calculator spreadsheet that would help you use the data you get from the ESP on almost any lens design. So and we're sort of assuming that you have a number of curve areas that you're inputting into this design, and they're at various chord lengths. So if we go forward from here and we look at, here's our basic data, here comes the spreadsheet, you put in the Jessen factor that you want, and any refractive information, and then you start going into the chord areas to fill in the different chord lengths that you're going to have, and what you think the clearance would be, or the clearance you would desire at these different chord lengths. Then we go back to the software and we actually start inputting the chord lengths into the software, and you'll see that happen in this video in just a second. But here they're putting the chord length in right here. That's the 6, and it gives us the min sag, the max sag. We input that there, and it starts doing the calculations of the flat meridians and the steep meridians. So you go through the different chord lengths, you input the mins and the maxes, and before you know it, you have the information that you need to send to a lab for them to design a lens for you. I'll let this play out. And there you go. That's what you need. And that's how it works. So we have several different ways that we work with sending information to the labs. One way is what you just saw in that spreadsheet is, for almost any lab, you can calculate the meridians, and you can take that information, you can send it to a lab. A real convenient way to do it is with what we call first lens fit algorithm. And for example, we have that with Paragon, where it's all preloaded for you into prescription form, and it's sent off to Paragon with all the data. The same thing with AccuLens, with the NewVision lens. We have the first lens fit algorithms, and you just send the data to them, and they get the data file. They can see exactly the images that you've seen, and they can make a lens from that data for you. And then there's a couple companies like Wave, where you have software that's resident on your computer, and we end up exporting the data from our images into their software, so then you can then design a lens from that software. And the night lens from Wave is a good example of that. Some people really like to do that, so we give you the choice. That's what we try to do. And that's how the iSurface Profiler works in a very quick session. Our virtual demos typically take 45 minutes. So if you want to have a virtual demo, you should contact us and we'll set something up and we can go into a lot more detail about the workflow and the software so you better understand how it would benefit you. Okay, so now I think it's time to turn it over to Steve and talk about this really unique lens called the NewVision lens from AccuLens. So Steve, if you'd unmute yourself and I will bring up your first slide.
Okay, I'm ready.
There you go.
All right. Thank you. So first I want to go ahead and get over some of the basics on the NewVision lens. NewVision is currently FDA cleared in the US as a daily wear OrthoK lens indicated up to 5 diopters of myopia correction in non-diseased eyes. So I'm often asked why NewVision, of course, because it's a new lens. And I'll give you a little history on where that came from. In my mind, for OrthoK for many years since I started in this industry, there are two phrases that I heard constantly within this realm, the OrthoK realm, that really bugged me. Number one was you never wear your OrthoK lenses during the day. And I understand that's an issue as far as the treatment's concerned, because in open eye state, the lens moves more, it can mess up the treatment. But in reality, people don't always wear the lenses every night. I'm one of them. I'm a bit lazy. Sometimes I skip a night or two of wearing my lens, and I still need to see. And I know if I put that lens on, I could see fantastically well. So I wanted to make a lens that would be more stable on the eye, because there's no reason with what we know today why we cannot do that. And the second one was the statement that OrthoK lenses are not meant to be comfortable. You put them on and close your eyes. A lot of doctors seem to not care if the lens is comfortable or not. I think that's a mistake. And I think, especially again in today's world, where things get more comfortable all the time, we should really be aiming to achieve a more comfortable design for our patients. Even in the soft lens market, lenses have been comfortable for 15 plus years, but it seems every couple of years something comes out that's even more comfortable. And I believe in the RGP world, we should be aiming for the same thing. And that's really where our modern day sclerals have come from too, to make lenses more comfortable. So those were the two statements that always stuck in the back of my head. And what really brought this lens to fruition was I was doing consulting, and a doctor had called because he couldn't get an OrthoK lens to stabilize on the eye. And generally speaking, with OrthoKs, we know if the lens isn't centering well, as far as lateral decentration, the go-to answers will make the lens bigger. And he was out of room because he was up to the corneal diameter. He couldn't make it bigger. He didn't know what to do. So we thought, well, let's do a corneo-scleral lens. Let's make it even bigger. So we went ahead and came up with a design for that. And that was sort of the birth of what we were doing here. And that was many years ago. It's evolved over the times, especially now with Eaglet and having this elevation and height data as we have. But what that lens actually achieved was improved stability in both the open and closed eye state, which checked my marking off of, well, now you can wear the lens during the day if you need to. It improved the comfort because the lens is big, it's large, it doesn't move as much, it tucks under the lids. And we got more consistent treatment because of that stable lens. And with that large diameter too, we improved the centration, which ends up reducing the glare. And then with the height elevation going off of these customization options, now we're also able to make it fully customized as far as optic zone widths, lens diameter. We're obviously larger than corneal diameter, but how much larger, we can use the corneal diameter measurement to dictate how large we're going to go. So it basically makes a truly customized lens for each eye. And what we were after was to make a lens that gives the practitioner the option to customize the lenses as much as they want without investing the hours in the actual design process. What I've seen over the years, there's a lot of doctors who really like to get into the nitty-gritty of lens design, which I do too. I'm on the same page. I really like to get into lens design until they have to design 5 or 6 lenses and they see the time it takes to actually do each and every one of these lenses. So our goal at AccuLens was, you tell us exactly what you want to do, exactly how you want that lens designed. You have that ability, but give it to us and we'll do the grunt work. We'll design that lens, we'll send you the lens. So we just need the good data. We want the design that you're after, and we'll do the work for you. And when we do that, here's just an image of one of the lenses on eye. And if you look on the upper left there, you'll see that is a corneal elevation map from Eaglet. And you'll see that cornea has a lot of cylinder, limbal to limbal sill. And we used the elevation data as provided from Eaglet to design this lens. And this is the exact lens we got. So you'll see it aligns very well in the in the mid periphery, so a good alignment zone. We have a standard bullseye pattern, or that fluorescein pattern. And the thing you'll note is the fluorescein at the edge actually comes up to the limbus. So the lens is not sealed off of the limbus. When people hear corneo-scleral lens, they hear the word scleral and they seem to think it's a true scleral lens. It is not. It's more of a large diameter corneal lens, like an extra large corneal lens. So the bearing of the lens should be on the cornea in that mid periphery. It should vault slightly over the cornea and hover over the sclera, to the point where we don't necessarily have bubbles or lift there, but there is lift, but it's more of a slight hover. And that's what creates that comfortable, stable lens. And by doing that, we can utilize the maximum width of that alignment zone to keep that lens stable and centered. And we came up with this design algorithm using Eaglet based on the success we had with the Maxim 3D. So those of you that are familiar, the Maxim 3D is our scleral lens. It's a free-form design. And essentially what we started doing was using 100% of the data from Eaglet. So we obviously need to know the RX that's going to be put in the lens, but as far as the design is concerned, we have the data. We saw, as Ted pointed out, it's extremely accurate data. So why would we try to make our current set designs fit into that data? Why not use the data to create a lens that will fit that eye? So that was the approach we took a few years ago. We've had great success. We basically scaled that formula down, that algorithm down, to make it more of a corneal type design to create the OrthoK lens and our corneo-scleral OrthoK. So basically, the optic zone is going to be spherical, and then everything outside the optic zone will be designed to match the corneal shape. So on the NewVision lens, that means it will have two meridians, a steep and a flat meridian, and that will best match the corneal toricity. On the scleral lens, that means we have a free form. Everything outside the optic zone is going to be free form to match the cornea and the sclera. And then, of course, we can customize the optic zone widths because we're going off of that data provided by Eaglet. Then the lenses themselves, they're all made out of optimum infinite material, which is a very high DK of 180. We do the right lenses by default in clear. The left lenses by default will be in blue. They are laser engraved, so they'll have a star along the steep meridian. Opposite the star and the steep meridian will be the serial number, and then the star on the on the right lens will be black. On the left, it will be clear. As you can see on this image, that star is superior temporal, about 15 degrees. And the way to judge these are to look at the map below. That's a corneal elevation map of that particular eye, and you'll see how that flat meridian is a little angled about 15 degrees. And that's actually how you can predict where the steep and the flat meridian are going to end up on the eye. So you can see those match up very well. And that eye, just for reference, had about 2.5 diopters of corneal cylinder. Now to fit the lens, we do require certification. It's an easy call. It's about 30-45 minutes. It's a very impersonal Zoom call with myself. We go over some slides and some details on acquiring good quality data, making sure the data is good, what the lens is supposed to look like, expected results. Now I can answer any questions based on your experience level or any questions you might have. And that link that you see up on the screen is how you get to them. It's basically my calendar. So you just go there, select a time, and we'll get on with the Zoom call and get you certified. And then finally, let's get on with the pricing of the lens. The initial lens is $140 per lens, $140. I saw there are a lot of international peers. This is US dollars, $140. Warranty period is going to be a 10-month warranty period. In that warranty period, the first remake is no charge. Any remakes needed after that within those 10 months are just $40 a lens for material fees. And as a new certified doctor, all initial orders are half price for that initial 90 days, just so you can get a feel of the lens, make sure you enjoy working with it. So $70 a lens for the next 90 days after certification, and that same warranty will apply. And that is the basics of the design and the history. And from there, I believe I will pass it back off.
Well, first of all, thanks, Steve. And I want to thank Eaglet with Ted and Elena for inviting me to talk a little bit about the device and also this new lens. Steve is Steve is the Wizard of Oz. So Steve is basically the man behind the curtain. That guy will know everything about this lens design, anything to troubleshoot it. I've very rarely needed much adjustment on the lenses, but Steve is quite humble, but he is the man. A couple quick notes about any of my cases. So my cases are all from, some of these are almost about a year, 6 months to a year. So they're going to look very similar, but some of the markings, it sounds like, will be different. You won't see the little asterisk on any of the images that I'm showing. And then Steve mentioned this is a daytime wear FDA approval right now. All of my cases are going to be, off-label. These are all traditional overnight OrthoK cases. So do keep that in mind. So I do have just a few, disclosures. Ultimately, I just work with a variety of equipment companies and lens manufacturers. I don't have any equity in any company. This is kind of a comparison of all the different instruments that we use to map out the surface of the eye. Sometimes it comes up like, okay, what's the best device to buy, or what can you do with each device? Ultimately, they're all going to map the surface of the cornea. Beyond that, you're going to be somewhat limited on a few of these, right? So obviously, keratometry is not good for a whole lot. Your placido disc topography, that's kind of still the predominant device that's going to be in most optometry clinics, probably, most ophthalmology clinics too, but certainly most optometry clinics. And, it's great. Like there's some tremendous placido disc topography units that are out there. But when you really kind of think about what it does and doesn't do, I mean, it really is limited to the cornea. And of course, some are better than others. Some get wider scans than others, but it is going to be tear film dependent. It is going to be dependent on the positioning of the device to the cornea or the visual axis. It is not going to obviously do the full cornea. It's not going to do the sclera. Now, there's a couple, at least one, maybe more, that kind of estimate sagittal height and estimate, what the sclera might look like based on trends of that peripheral cornea as it's going outwards. And it may be, very close to accurate in some cases, but, what you'll find if you have an eaglet or in a purchase an eaglet, and you'll see in a couple of the cases I have, what you predict that the sclera may look like based on what the cornea looks like, it just doesn't always work that way. And then, of course, you've got your eaglet, which is an example of basically a Fourier projection. So it's essentially just shooting two grids at the eye, and then you'll get elevation data off of that. And so, it works on the cornea and sclera. This one I particularly like because it doesn't really matter where the position of the eye and the device is. They kind of look straight ahead. You're gonna get a good map. Now, you're going to get more accuracy if they're looking directly at the target, of course, but it's still usable data in many cases. And then, of course, there's just other devices that will image the entire cornea. But as you'll notice, basically nothing's perfect. Everything has its own little setbacks or flaws. I wish there was just totally one device that just did everything perfectly, but that's not reality, of course. So we're going to look at placido disc topography versus, what the Eaglet is going to kind of look like. And this is not an OrthoK case. This is just this is actually a post-RK case. This is the same patient. It's the same eye, in fact. This is a placido disc device on the left. And then you'll see in the bottom right of that image, this is your elevation map from a placido disc device. And then on the right side of your screen, this is what an Eaglet map looks like. So this is all elevation data, okay? So this is elevation data on the cornea. This is just kind of zooming out to a wider field, including cornea and sclera. The top right is a really interesting, colorful map here, but ultimately this is more of a quality assessment kind of map. You're not really going to use this clinically to design a lens or really interpret the eye too much, but this is going to be your way of interpreting the quality of your scans. So we'll talk a little bit about tangent angles. That's a really important thing to look at. But you can basically see, if you compare the bottom left Eaglet scan and the bottom right placido disc scan, they're essentially the same. Okay, if you adjust the scales, you get them even more so the same, but very, very accurate and very similar in appearance to what you may be familiar with seeing. Now, what does a placido disc device and a Eaglet device look like when you're doing orthokeratology? So again, this is the same patient, the same right eye and left eye that's on the screen, and this is the same date. It's the same, visit. That's why the pictures look the same. So, and it's a really nice fitting OrthoK lens. It's kind of a smaller optic zone design. It's probably either a high myope or maybe a child. And so you'll see your traditional kind of bullseye pattern from a placido disc device where you got this red ring with kind of a blue center. And then when you look over to the right, you're going to see the same thing, but this is what it looks like on an Eaglet. So you're still going to see your bullseye patterns. What you're actually looking at, to walk you through it, where my cursor is an axial map. Some of us are used to looking at axial maps more often. Others of us prefer tangential maps, which is going to be just to the right of that. Your tangential maps are always going to be a little bit tighter and smaller as far as where that red ring will be. And then the bottom left over here is refractive maps. So your axial maps and your refractive maps will look very similar. We won't get too much into OrthoK and what these maps mean, but basically tangential looks different because it's basically the perspective of how light is coming perpendicular to each part of the cornea. So whether it's the front of the cornea, the mid-periphery, the periphery, it's kind of from the viewpoint, so to speak, of light coming directly perpendicular, but in hundreds or maybe even thousands of points. Your axial and refractive maps, are basically in reference to your visual axis. So your visual axis, hence axial, it's basically just a straight ahead viewpoint. And then it's going to be about the curvature in relation to that straight ahead entry point. So that's why they all look a little bit different. All right, on the Eaglet, I've had my Eaglet over here for about 3.5, almost 4 years. So these are things that I've learned that kind of help give us the best results. And this is just after trying everything else, everything that everybody was doing at any given time. I tried it, and over time I just kind of figured out, okay, there's certain things that work a little bit better for me, and then these are what I'd recommend. So when you are doing scleral, well, really any case, you want to basically try to prep the eye with moisture drops, some kind of lubricant drops. I generally recommend a particular product that's available in the United States, and I think it might be available in parts of Europe. It's called Optase. They make a really great drop called the Optase MGD Advanced, and of course I have no financial interest in that company, but it's a preservative-free eye drop. It comes in a multi-use bottle, so we sell one to the patient, and then we also keep them in the office, and that's our drop for pretty much anything and everything here in the office. And then we dose them in the office before their scans and while they're in the room, and I use it to wet the fluorescein strips with it. I use it for everything. So it's a multi-use bottle, so we can clean it off and use it for different patients. And then it's got hyaluronic acid. It's got some oil in it from a plant seed, so it works really, really great. But your Eaglet is projecting these grids onto the surface of the eye, and so if you've got dry spots or dry eye, that's going to give you unreliable data. So that's your main objective, is getting a good tear film to get a good scan. Now, if you're doing scleral scans, then I recommend numbing the eye, because you're going to be holding the eyelids really wide apart. The eye's going to get dry and maybe not comfortable for the patient. You also be applying more fluorescein to the sclera. If you are doing corneal imaging, corneal lenses, or orthokeratology, whether it's corneal traditional orthokeratology or a corneo-scleral, or what I like to call a translimbal design, you don't generally probably need to anesthetize the eye. You can probably just use fluorescein in the on the palpebral conj or something like what we often do in clinic, and that's probably enough. But you're going to pull the eyelid wide enough based on the what you're trying to scan. It really is a two-person job. I know there's some people out there that do it just themselves, but I wouldn't do that unless you're somehow really forced to do that. You really need to be focused on getting those lids properly in position. and the centration, the focus of the instrument. Obviously, the better it's in focus, the more reliable the data. So my recommendation is that the doctor be the person who holds the lids and have one of your staff members do the operating the instrument. Some people like to do that backwards, but you know, most of your instruments in the office, your staff is very, I mean, anything from your retinal camera and your autorefractor and your OCTs and, you know, topography or any other instrument you have. I mean, these are basically joystick operated instruments. Your staff does this all day, every day. They're frankly just going to be better at it than you are. So now what they're not very good at is handling the eyelid and the face. They're not as comfortable with that, right? And we're obviously very comfortable. So now hold on one second. Hey, come here. I'm going to introduce y'all to Henry because you're going to hear him. I'm running out of treats here, but this is Henry. All right. If y'all hear him making noise, forgive me, okay? I'm his babysitter. So as far as the fluorescein, essentially the more the better. So don't be stingy on that. 2 strips is always better. 1. This is a big takeaway, I guess, for me. The lid block technique. If you look at the bottom right, you'll see these Q-tips or Q-tips. There's different devices that you can also use to do this. But ultimately, what works better, in my opinion, is to kind of block the lids against the top and bottom orbital bones. I don't typically recommend using your fingers to pull on the lids. Now, that's, again, I'm used to do that. Everybody kind of starts out doing that. But what I found is not only does it work better in keeping the lid out of position, but it's more comfortable for the patient. So ultimately, if you kind of imagine grabbing your skin or grabbing your arm, if you pull on skin, it's not super comfortable, it kind of hurts. Pulling hurts, pushing doesn't. So if you push the eyelids apart and kind of prop them in position, you know, it's painless, right? All right, the other thing is just take lots of images, you know, take multiple rounds if you need to. No big deal. It takes the image really, really fast. I don't think we showed that yet, but it's just basically a quick flash of the camera. So, you know, take several and then review your best ones later. Okay, I'm going to move on to assessing the quality of these maps. So this is really, really important. Alignment, focus. Ted mentioned that in the previous slide. There's even metrics now that will kind of grade you essentially for how good your focus is, and that was a tremendous software advantage there. What you're going to look at in the top images is just an infrared image. Takes a beautiful infrared image. Underneath that is also another infrared image, but this is your grid. So this is, again, just an image of the grids projected onto the eye. If you see over here on this is a right eye, you can see that there's some dry spots over here on the grid. And then what that's going to do to your map is it's going to make it a little bit mucky. Okay, so this colorful map, third from the top, that's going to be your traditional elevation map, and at the bottom, this is the tangent angle. So this is essentially, again, like your quality assessment map. And you can just see those dry spots just really create some distortion there. Versus next to it, we got this really beautiful grid pattern. It's going to give you really nice, smooth map. You're going to get much better quality data. So this is applicable for both, you know, corneal lenses or scleral lenses, and as is the case with all of our imaging, particularly, you know, topography, propylometry type imaging. You know, it's that famous garbage in, you know, garbage out. Really worth getting great quality scans. All right, so again, what are your goals with the Eaglet specific to orthokeratology, which is different than scleral lens mapping? So with orthokeratology, you're trying to get the cornea out to the limbus. Okay, it doesn't matter what the sclera looks like. Focus and centration, again, Ted mentioned, you know, the accuracy is down to 2 microns on the cornea. Well, you know, that's obviously only true if the focus is good. So you really want to get that dialed in. Tear film is obviously going to help or be important. And then you're really going to need to assess the results of those scans based on, like, okay, do you have a normal cornea or not? What's the symmetry look like? The eccentricity, your Ks, you know, any risk for keratoconus. The Eaglet is going to have that data is going to have those metrics in this device, similar to a traditional topographer would. And then, of course, the size of the cornea, what that size looks like. All right, these are some examples of an Eaglet map, and I'll walk through kind of the different topography-related features on it. Before I do that, I just want to point out that there is something really interesting. It's kind of, I don't want to say an Easter egg, but it's a nice little thing. If you're very astute at looking at elevation maps, or you already have an Eaglet, you probably notice this. But if you don't, there is something really interesting about this particular eye. So, like a traditional topography elevation map, your cooler colors are going to be further away or steeper, whatever term you kind of want to think of. And then your warmer colors are going to be higher, closer to you, flatter maybe if you want to think of it that way, but it's basically, cooler colors are lower elevation and warmer colors are higher elevation. Well, you would probably assume that whatever the cornea looks like, the sclera basically looks the same, but you would be surprised. I wouldn't say often, but not uncommonly, you will see that the scleral map or the scleral astigmatism, it's totally unrelated to the corneal astigmatism. So if you see right here with the cooler colors in the cornea are 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, this is your traditional with the rule cornea. But when you look in the sclera, not at all. It's really more pretty much against the rule. You got your steep part of the sclera horizontally, you got your flat part of the sclera vertically, right? So anyways, that's really important because if you're going to be designing these larger lenses, you really need something that's going to get you the full picture. All right, features of this Eaglet, again, it's going to give you, what you're used to. You get pupil measurements, including pupil center, pupil diameter. Okay, it'll also outline the size of the cornea via the limbus and the HVID. It'll also give you the center, the geometric center of the cornea, which is separate than the geometric center of the pupil. It'll give you your traditional, primary meridians, right? Your flat and steep corneal meridians. It'll also give you your flat and steep scleral meridians as well. That's just not on this slide. This will also basically give you these rings, which are going to be 3, 6, 9, and 12 millimeter rings. So that's helpful to kind of know where everything is at. And then in infrared, everything I just mentioned is just kind of outlined in a beautiful infrared image. So you can play around and set this up however you want to and customize it to your liking. The metrics is going to give you elevation data at any chord that you select. Your steep and your flat meridians, your average elevation height, all that stuff's over to the left. And then on the right side of the screen is really your more traditional corneal maps, like, the curvatures of the cornea, your eccentricity in both meridians, also some keratoconus analysis metrics, and then pupil and limbus metrics. So a lot of data coming off this map here. All right, so the next one we want to talk about is basically, why would you do something like a larger OrthoK lens? This particular lens that we're talking about tonight is the NewVision lens, which is a corneo-scleral lens. Another common terminology is translimbal. That's just the term that I'm used to and that I like to use. It's the same. It's tomato, right? It's the same thing. So it's basically smaller than the cornea is your traditional OrthoK lenses that have all been FDA approved up to this point, and then slightly bigger than the cornea. This is going to be your first FDA approved option. Well, the comfort is good. I like to think that corneal OrthoK lenses are also comfortable, but obviously it's going to depend on the design, right? So if it's a really well fitted lens, you're going to have better comfort. If it's a poorly fitted lens, you're going to have worse comfort. But the cornea, and this is kind of just true for corneal RGP lenses versus scleral lenses. The cornea is a very sensitive tissue. The entirety of that corneal OrthoK lens is going to be on that very sensitive tissue. So you might have a little bit more awareness. It might also have a little bit more movement, potentially, depending on the size and the fit and the design. But it might be a little bit more like that. Versus, a larger translimbal or corneo-scleral lens, you're really not going to get much movement. The comfort is very, very good. So good that, as Steve mentioned, it's you can wear it during the daytime if needed. Okay, centration. Again, usually it's good, but it depends on a lot of factors with a traditional corneal lens, how well it's fitted, what the eye kind of looks like. But in a larger lens, the centration it's much easier. It's basically, I would say, always spot on. Now, if you have an irregular cornea, when I say irregular cornea, there's a couple things, right? It'd be off-label, to do these on irregular corneas, but that's not to say that, some of us don't do that. Irregular corneas could be anything. It could still be a symmetric cornea. It could be a post-refractive surgery cornea, like a post-LASIK cornea. It's still symmetric, but it's not normal curvature, not normal eccentricity, maybe. And then it could also be irregular. Maybe you have some irregular astigmatism, right? Maybe you got some very, very mild subclinical keratoconus, which, if it's mild enough or that we don't expect, any progression, or maybe it's an older patient. I've got a couple like that are in their 60s that are doing OrthoK, and I don't expect any progression, and they're very, very mild, and it works fantastic. But, you have to take each cornea and evaluate it separately. But in a corneal lens, it's going to be much more challenging, much more dependent on certain features that you're working with, certain lens designs. It's just overall, in many cases, they're not candidates. In a larger lens, that changes. They may actually be excellent candidates. The vision's going to be comparable in many ways, but it's going to be really largely dependent on the optic zone diameter. I mean, for kids, it doesn't really matter that much because you're going to use, typically smaller to medium-sized optic zone diameters on children, because we know it works a little bit better, as far as, myopia management, myopia control efficacy. But that's not going to be true on your older, teenage driving age patients, or your adult patients, which a lot of my patients are adult patients. So therefore, you want to go bigger in the optic zone to provide better vision, less halos around lights. Well, that can be tough to do in corneal lenses because you just don't have as much real estate to work with. With the larger lens, you expand the size of the lens, now you're also expanding that surface area that the lens and the eye are in contact. And that also allows you to just kind of blow everything up in size. All right, power ranges, in many ways, it's going to be about the same depending on, that particular cornea. And when you're designing the optic zone, but there has been some reports that you can maybe do a little bit more in some of these larger translimbal corneo-scleral designs. That was presented on earlier this year at Vision by Design. Application and removal, it's going to be kind of similar to a regular, corneal RGP lens on the smaller ones. It's not like a scleral lens. It's going to be kind of halfway in between. It's very, very unlikely that I don't see how that a corneo-scleral ortho-K or transluminal ortho-K could come off the eye. But every now and then, even a really well-fitted patient, I'll occasionally, especially early on, I'll have a couple of patients that will say, hey, my right, corneal ortho-K lens came out down on my pillowcase or something while I was sleeping, right? I kind of rubbed my eye or something, it came off my eye, or maybe it moved onto the white part of the eye, the sclera. That could happen on a corneal lens, but that's not likely to happen on a corneo-scleral lens. So that thing's going to be much more reliably in place. The colors will be a little bit more limited in the bigger designs because of the blank of the actual the lens during manufacturing. But you really only need those two colors. Clear and blue is kind of what you need. All right, so this is a good way of kind of looking at, small versus large and what it really means. So you got the same eye here. It's a 12 millimeter eye, and you want to use a more typical 6 millimeter optic zone. Okay. Well, if we do the math here, we look at the corneal lens, if you're going to do that, 90-95% the size of the cornea, that's going to be their best way to fit a corneal lens, then your lens size is about 11 millimeters. But you're going to have some edge lift, okay, on either side, all sides of the lens, which is typically about half a millimeter. So on either side, that would be 1 millimeter. So that equals about 10 millimeters of actual diameter where the lens is kind of resting on the eyeball. And then you take away your optic zone size, which you said was 6. And then there's something called the reverse curve. It basically is the lens returning back to the cornea. All right, so it's lifted off from the cornea, but it needs to make its way back to the cornea. So that's also called the return zone. So that's usually half millimeter to millimeter, in width in its route back to the cornea. So you subtract all that out, and you got about only 2-3 millimeters, and then that's on either side of the optic zone. So that equals about 1 to 1.5 millimeters of actual landing zone, meaning like where the lens is supporting itself in both, comfort, position, centration, alignment. That's not very much. Okay, same eye, same kind of philosophy. Instead of doing maybe 10%, smaller than the cornea, let's do 10% bigger than the cornea. So that's going to make it roughly about a 13 millimeter lens. As Steve mentioned earlier, the lens is not landing on the limbus. The lens is going to depart from the cornea right prior to the limbus. I think of it like a plane on a runway. You're going to basically run that plane on the runway for pretty much as long as you can, but you are going to lift off before you run out of runway. All right, otherwise you crash, of course. So that plane just needs to lift off before it runs out of runway. Your lens just needs to lift off before it runs out of cornea. Okay, so that's going to be roughly about 11.5 millimeters of overall alignment diameter. Now you take away your optic zone size. It's the same, roughly, your return zone is going to be about the same size, regardless of these different lens designs, smaller or bigger. So you factor all that out, but because the lens is bigger, you now got about, roughly 4-ish millimeters of landing zone on either, split between two sides. So now between 175 to 225 millimeters. So basically what that means is if we had a little over a millimeter of space to land on the cornea for the smaller lens, now you've got double that, essentially, almost, on the bigger lens, and nothing else changed, and you didn't affect the limbus. So we're going to go through just some cases here, and I'll make them as short as I can. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and we want to get time for questions. But this is a presbyopic patient. We're doing some monovision OrthoK. Basically, we've been talking about OrthoK for a while, but this patient had been continuous wear contact lenses for years and years. I didn't put him there. I'm not going to take any credit or blame for it. But he'd been in these lenses, been sleeping in them for a long time. These are the least compliant patients out there, right? But the reason that they're so non-compliant is because they like to see well and they don't want to see blurry, right? And you can't really blame them for that. So it's actually pretty understandable. And then they don't want to wear glasses and they don't want to do surgery, which is also pretty understandable. So actually, they sound like the perfect orthokeratology candidate. So anyways, that was basically we needed to get him healed up. He had regular corneas, wanted monovision, wanted to see well all the time. This is his ulcer. So this is not related to his OrthoK. This is prior to the OrthoK, right? This is from wearing those continuous wear soft contact lenses way too long. So you can see the ulcer and you can see the progression. It healed up very nicely. So, after it healed up, then we basically, took his maps. We did, we took some baseline data. He's a very, average kind of myope, very average kind of, early-ish presbyope. We did found out which was his dominant eye, of course. And then discuss options for, bigger or smaller OrthoK. The reason we went the bigger sized OrthoK, these corneo-scleral OrthoK, is because, well, he's an adult, right? So we want as big of an optic zone as possible to limit, the HOAs for nighttime driving or just overall quality of vision. As far as comfort, this guy had been in, these continuous wear soft lenses forever and ever. He never worn any kind of RGP lenses before. That I didn't want to sequester his, his motivation. So we really wanted something that was as comfortable as possible and easy to adapt to. So we went the larger size lenses. This is what his eyes look like. So you can see we got really nice quality maps based on the tangent angles. Okay. We've got really nice quality. There's essentially 3 ways to measure the quality of your maps with your Eaglet. One is going to be the grid that was mentioned earlier, right? The projection of that grid on the eye. The second I already mentioned, which is going to be your tangent angles map and how smooth these colors look. The third is going to be your corneal elevation map. Okay, so if you got dry spots, it's going to show up over here really, really easily. So you really want a nice, smooth elevation map on the cornea. So that's really critical for a good outcome. Okay, and its metrics are not anything worth talking about. Again, we just got good, nice maps. So this is what the lenses look like on his eyes. You'll notice in the slides coming up, I love infrared photography. I use infrared photography all the time on all types of lenses. corneal RGP lenses, corneal OrthoK lenses, corneo-scleral OrthoK lenses, scleral lenses, anything and everything. I love infrared imaging. It allows you to observe most features of your lens fit without the patient blinking or being sensitive to the light. You can check the diameter, you check the movement. It's a really underutilized tool. Most you can get it with your Eaglet. Your Eaglet has it won't capture the image and save it, but you can evaluate your lens through infrared with your Eaglet. And there's many other devices that utilize this technology. Highly recommend it. And then the picture below, you can just see it just looks like those images that Steve shared earlier. We got your traditional OrthoK pattern more in the middle, and then the fluorescein pattern is right before it lifts off of the cornea. This is, again, the evaluation of the lens through infrared, my favorite way of doing it. And what you're actually looking for is that for a lens like this, a translimbal or corneo-scleral lens, you really want to look kind of like a soft contact lens. So meaning when they blink their eye, it should move very subtly. Okay, if they blink or if you have like a little push-up method, it should move very subtly. Okay, but it shouldn't be adhered to the eye. It shouldn't have any binding to the cornea. Now, also what you can look at is the edge of the optic zone. That's this ring that you were seeing in the video. That's the edge of the optic zone. You can see that in relation to the pupil. And because if you have your lights off and infrared's an invisible light, it's really doing it in relation to the scotopic pupil, which is really invaluable to know, okay, what do I expect from my outcome here? Do I need to make my optic zones bigger because this person's got, really big pupils, or, you move from there. This is just what it looks like in our traditional, fluorescein patterns, but you can see that there is tear exchange and there's no binding. You can see that there's edge lift, and it lifts off right before the edge of the cornea, right before that plane runs out of runway. And then you can see your traditional reservoir in the middle. Okay, that's kind of your treatment zone of the lens. It's an excellent, excellent fit. All right, so this is what the maps will look like if you're observing before and after maps with the Eaglet. Okay, so on the these are just the right eye over here on the left side of the screen, left eye's on the right side of the screen per usual. So your axial maps. Okay, you're going to get your kind of bullseye pattern, and it'll look different between the axial and the tangential, as I mentioned earlier. The Eaglet is very, very good at finding little central islands. Other devices are not as good because other devices, pretty much all of them, will want to extrapolate or interpolate the data. It doesn't like weird data that doesn't make sense, so it'll kind of blend data points. So sometimes central islands can be easily overlooked. Now, obviously, if it's a big one, a big problematic one, you'll see it on your traditional placido disc devices. But if it's a really small one, it'll just blend the data points for you, and you really kind of don't know. Now, as Ted mentioned earlier, there is no extrapolation of data points with the Eaglet. So whatever data points it gives you, that is real as captured by the instrument. So this is like a very, very teeny central island. Having said that, it was really small, didn't affect his vision. His vision is great, so we didn't mess with it, but it's just a nice example. And then this is a monovision case. So, the right eye was undercorrected, so it's not going to be as prominent over here in your tangent maps. It's more prominent on the left eye where we corrected the eye fully, the full amount of myopia. Now, your Eaglet maps will also take difference maps, and difference maps are key. This is absolutely crucial. This is everything when it comes to orthokeratology. So you really need to know how much change occurred on the cornea and where so. So this will automatically do this for you. The top is going to be axial difference maps, bottom is going to be tangential maps. And the principle is the same. It's going to be kind of a warmer color. Sorry about that. Kind of a warmer color around the ring, which is your reservoir of your lens, where most of the tissue is being reshaped into. And this is going to be cooler in the middle, where it's kind of getting flattened out, kind of compressed a little bit. Now, also worth noting is going to be your profile map. Okay, this is telling you how much prescription did you change. Okay, so this patient, I can't honestly remember. I think it was like a -350 or something, and we corrected up to about 3-ish or so on the right eye, leaving a little bit in reserve, and on the left eye we went a little bit deeper, did the full amount. You can also see where that little central island was, that little spot right there where my cursor is. That's also reflected with this little hump. Okay, so it's very, very accurate in your profile map. Results ultimately were great. Okay, basically everything I wanted to do, we did. You saw 2015 in the distant eye, and you saw 20/20 minus in the non-dominant near eye. Seeing great up close. No readers needed. Left them about 50 to 75, minus 50 to 75 in reserve. All right, this is a high myope example. So this is, off label again for all orthokeratology. There's not any orthokeratology, CRT, VST, or otherwise that basically goes as high. So, but very easily done with this particular corneo-scleral OrthoK lens. So, patient had been a prior OrthoK wearer, was really happy. But we were just unable to get really good nighttime vision, okay, in a traditional corneal design. He happened to have just big pupils, so I was kind of limited on what I could do. He also had really low eccentricity. Those are tougher cases. So basically what that means is the cornea is flattening out, the rate in which it's flattening as it goes further and further out. So, if you have high eccentricity, basically the area where the lens is going to actually touch down and align itself to the surface of the eye, it's already flattened quite a bit at that point. So now it just kind of touches down in a better position. But if it's still flattening at the location, it hasn't finished basically flattening. Well, now you're trying to align the curves of those lenses where the cornea is also still curving away from you, and it makes it more challenging. So low eccentricity cases are really tough in smaller lenses. Our goal, of course, was just for good nighttime vision for the most part, and then some improved centration. So this is his before maps. Beautiful quality of maps is seen in the tangent angles maps as well as your corneal elevation maps. You do not need that much sclera data. Okay, so it's okay when you look at the bisphere map that there's a lot missing up at the top. We don't care. We're not fitting out there. We're just fitting the cornea to the limbus. So just keep that in mind. You capture as much data as you plan to use. All right. You can see that the eyes are pretty normal for most part, but the eccentricity is 0.18. Okay, and 0.17. So typically like 0.5, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, maybe 0.7. That's going to be more typical, and that's better for OrthoK. So ultimately, the higher the better. 0.18, 0.17. That's pretty darn low. So this is what the lenses look like on the eyes. As you can see in the infrared images, big pupils. Okay, really, really big pupils. Now, what you can also see if you look real carefully is you can see the edge of my optic zone. All right, even in these big scotopic pupils, I moved that optic zone way out there, and I was able to move it way out there because I went so big with the lens that I still have a lot of space here to position the lens, align the lens to the eye. Okay, so now you're going to be somewhat limited on how big that you can go just based on the amount of myopia, right? So if you got a really high amount of myopia, you can only go so big because of Munnerlin's formula, which you can Google and look up later. So you have to be somewhat reasonable with that, but you can go bigger than you can in a traditional corneal lens. So this is what the lens looks like. Beautiful fit. Everything looks really nice there. These are the results. So the difference maps, again, centration looks great. Okay. We're going to skip through this a little bit, but ultimately this is a fantastic outcome. You can see them side by side. You don't have to do difference maps, of course. So if you want to see them side by side, you want to see kind of the before and after, and then also the difference, you can do so. You can adjust that in both your axial and your tangential maps. Patient seeing great. 2015, slightly overcorrected on the right eye. Maybe in some cases might be worth chasing that and fixing that, but at this point, he was happy and I was happy, and we just kind of moved on. So this is case 3. There's only 4 cases. We're almost done. I think you hang on 5 more minutes here. So this is another previous OrthoK corneal OrthoK patient fit through childhood and adolescence. Now she's 24, got some dry eye, pretty typical myope with some astigmatism. with the rule for the most part. So anyways, she stopped because she basically kind of wasn't happy in her results with her OrthoK as she got older. I'm sure wasn't a patient of mine. I inherited her recently, but she probably was pretty happy up until she got to kind of late teens to college age, and then at that point just probably stuck with it as long as she could, and dropped out, went to glasses and contacts for only a couple years. Dry eye is a problem even in the daily disposables. Her corneas are normal as far as shape, but interestingly very small. And you'll see that oftentimes with Asian eyes, the corneas tend to be a little bit smaller. I think her HPID was just a little bit over 11. All right, so we wanted to go with a little bit bigger optic zone size, which is always the main, in my opinion, greatest advantage with these corneo-scleral design lenses. And because she has a small cornea, she would have to have a small corneal OrthoK lens, right? So you've got a smaller cornea, you have a smaller lens, and then you have even less space to work with, even less real estate to play around with. So it makes it really tough to impossible to do large optic zones in small corneas. Okay. We also wanted, because she was unhappy with comfort and even daily disposable soft contact lenses, I was very, conscious of her comfort through the lens. This lens is going to not move as much. It's going to be not like a scleral lens, but similar in some regards. So that was kind of what we were going for. Baseline maps, they look pretty normal. You can obviously see a fair amount of corneal astigmatism in these corneal elevation maps. Okay, the quality, the focus, everything came out really great. I cannot emphasize that enough, how important it is to get high quality maps. You want high quality results. And then this is what the lenses look like on the eye. So again, looking at the ring that you see where my cursor is, that's the end of your optic zone. So you can see where that is relative to a scotopic pupil. All right, so we got plenty of space. Okay, you can also see beyond that where the lens is landing. We got plenty of alignment zone, alignment curve area. And then in your fluorescein maps, we've got a nice fitted lens. This is a nice fitted lens on both eyes. We got a nice reservoir for some fluid underneath the lens, which is going to act as almost a scleral lens type of thing. As far as the eye being bathed with a fluid reservoir, which again on a dry patient, it's particularly important. And then this is just again same eyes with fluorescein. It's just you can see what the treatment zone and alignment zone and edge lift look like, and again how that lens is departing from the cornea just before it runs out of runway. All right, kind of just looking at her maps, again, your grid maps at the top just showing us, the quality of scans. You always want to be kind of comparing that in all your maps. Your tangent maps, axial maps, refractive maps are all there for your viewing. Everything came out looking really nice. The column on the right of each of these, this is going to be your subtraction maps, okay? And then same thing here, your difference maps. So we're going to move on a little bit faster. Ultimately, all you need to know is we achieved what we were trying to do, which was to get a larger optic zone and to get good vision. So 2015 in her vision, okay, nailed it. So we're going to move on to our last case, which is basically an oblique astigmatism case, okay? Nothing crazy as far as the astigmatism, but maybe a little bit higher on that left eye. Oblique astigmatism, again, that can be a little bit tough in corneal lenses. This particular patient was a daily disposable soft contact lens, just wanting them for basically working out. But with oblique axes, sometimes you're a bit limited in what's available, okay, as far as different brands and different types of soft contact lenses. And there may be a little bit more likelihood of rotation as well, but your options can get limited at some of these axes and some designs. As far as his corneas, everything was pretty normal as far as symmetry and shape and metrics. As far as against the rule astigmatism or oblique astigmatism, those are tougher in your traditional corneal OrthoK lenses, just because the lens, it'll kind of slide. Okay, it may decenter downwards and against the rule or oblique astigmatism case. So it's always tougher to get good centration in those, because it's just like your traditional, RGP lens with an against the rule cornea. It kind of slides and downwards. So, but if you can increase your amount of surface area of applanation, then you can increase essentially your control. So that's why we went with this larger lens. We also, again, it wasn't really a regular contact lens wear anyways, mostly was in glasses a lot of times. So we really wanted something that had the greatest amount of initial comfort right off the bat, and for the easiest kind of lens adaptation. All right, these are the baseline maps. Everything looks good. This is Artifact over here. It's a little dry spot on the sclera, which gives you this weird spot. It's not real. It's not a pinguecula. Doesn't really matter if it was. The point is that you don't care if you're fitting a cornea lens or a OrthoK lens, even this corneo-scleral design. You don't care. You only care up through the limbus. Everything else is just icing. So everything looked good, and this is what the lens is going to look like on the eye. Again, we've got a nice large optic zone over here for him. Centration looks amazing. Okay, fit looks amazing. There's just some more images showing the same. These are difference maps or comparison maps, as well as your difference maps. Okay, again, all that looks really, really nice. More examples of your difference maps, and again, our power profile maps. Again, centration, treatment, everything looks great there. And then our visions, 2020 Shy, 2015 OU. Prescriptions, essentially right at about Plano. This patient's, I think, 37, so it's actually kind of nice to be maybe spherical equivalent minus a quarter. So it's actually kind of a really great place to be for that 37-year-old. So that is the end of my slides. I'm going to stop share and turn it back to Elena and Ted and Steve in the audience for any questions. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Wolf. That was terrific. You went over some great cases and shared a lot of really important information. So questions, and I know there were a number of questions in the chat. Let me pull that up. The latest question was, well, it looks like Elena tried to answer it. It was Dr. Sugarito. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, so I apologize if I didn't. But to older and more experienced optometrists, what is the accuracy of using Eaglet to design OrthoK lenses? I'm still using my Medmont corneal topography, and I'm too scared to rely on fluorescein pattern findings on the Eaglet. What do you think, Dr. Wolf?
I mean, I'll anybody else with the Eaglet can chime in. I'll get started. But so basically, in short, I think the accuracy is good, provided that the quality of the maps are good. I mean, I didn't want to beat a dead horse, so to speak, right? But you heard me say it, once or twice or 12 times. That the quality of the scan is going to be really, really crucial, in the precision and centration and focus is going to be really critical with orthokeratology specifically, because we're talking about a few microns. It's not the same as like scleral lenses, right? Where you're talking like 50 to 100 micron. I mean, it's like we got much more space that we're trying to be accurate with. When you're talking about clearance over the central cornea or alignment, I mean, we're talking really literally like 5 microns sometimes. So, but I would say, yeah, it's very accurate. Having said that, for the credit to both the companies we're talking about tonight, right? So we're talking about, the NewVision lens from AccuLens. That is compatible with more than just Eaglet. You can use, I believe your Medmont, Steve can speak to this, and Pinacam. There's different devices that can work with that lens. And also in relation to the Eaglet is not only compatible in OrthoK to the NewVision lens. You can use your Eaglet and actually, several, right? Wave, they're working, I think, to get things going with eye space. You can use it on CRT, which is, the biggest company that's, out there. So a lot of users, I'm sure, can speak to any experience with that. And then the NewVision, right? So they're not tied to each other. You can use your device and have great results with the NewVision corneo-scleral OrthoK lens. And then if you have an Eaglet or you're interested in Eaglet, well, you can also use your Eaglet with any number of different types of, rigid, OrthoK lenses, scleral lenses, or whatever. So it's just how you, how you take the data.
And then Dr. Tang was asking, will the new Vision corneo-scleral OrthoK have a toric BC to better correct astigmatism? And then also, will the lens be able to correct higher myopia than traditional OrthoK lenses?
Well, I can address that one. As far as the toric base curve, the challenge we run into there as a company to provide that is FDA approval. Current FDA approvals for OrthoK lenses have a spherical back optic zone. So the approach we've taken is to best align with that peripheral cornea. So when we have a good alignment in that peripheral area, when we actually design the lens, and even Ted, as you were putting this in at the beginning on your OrthoK tool you have there, it calls for the spherical component of the RX. So if we have a spherical correction with astigmatism, so astigmatism correction, so it's a -2, -1, we program in and figure out that base curve. We're really aiming for that -2. And then the reverse curve and the alignment curves are calculated based along the sagittal depth values or the height values of the cornea in all those zones where that lens is now going to land and contour the shape of the cornea. And what that does is sphericalizes the resultant correction that's needed. So one of those case studies that Dr. Will showed, with that last case, I think it was fairly high. I forget exactly what it was, but it was like -175.
There's 2 diopters still.
Yeah, 2 diopters still. And what was the spherical on that? Was it a minus? Do you remember?
That eye was -2, -2.
So -2, -2. So and with that, by using a spherical optic zone, we got that eye pretty much to a low SIL. It was not quite plano. Was it plano -0.5 or something?
Well, that particular eye was I think it was plano -1/4, or maybe plano -50 SIL. I mean, it's
yeah. So we got 2 diopters of SIL.
Nobody's going to notice.
Yeah, 2 diopters of SIL taken care of without having to use a toric optic zone. So we haven't gone that route yet for a couple of reasons. One, in most of the cases I've seen, I haven't really seen that it's been needed when we're designing lenses in this fashion.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. You shouldn't need it. You can probably go much higher in SIL with a spherical optic zone. Where it's going to matter is with what's called residual SIL. So if your delta Ks, like if your corneal astigmatism doesn't match the refractive astigmatism at the vertex corneal plane, and if it's significant, right? If it's half a diopter, nobody cares. Just don't worry about that. But if it's maybe like a diopter, diopter and a quarter, diopter and a half of residual SIL, that's really the only time that you would ever need to do something like that. And that also, you're going to essentially assess if that's even like a case you want to take on, or if that's really a great candidate.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Verk had asked, you had talked about, you already addressed one of his questions. Can you use these, or can you use other data to design these lenses if you don't have an Eaglet? And the answer to that question is yes. But can these lenses, can you use these lenses to do OrthoK for keratoconus patients? And you sort of commented on that with one of your patients, Dr. Wolf.
Yeah, so I actually have, I don't want to say a lot because I don't know who's listening, but like I've got quite a few patients with irregular corneas that if it's mild enough and, again, I'm not worried about progression, I'll do OrthoK. And I don't know if I've had many that have not worked out, but having said that, I didn't start out like that. That took, many years. I've been wearing OrthoK myself for 17 years. okay, for some reference. I've been fitting OrthoK for going on about 15 years. So it's not like I jumped in doing, cases like that. But yeah, you can do it. It just really requires being very careful about the state of that cornea, progression. The nice thing with OrthoK is you're really only affecting the epithelium. So, as far as the really thin corneas or some irregularity there, it really doesn't matter too much. But they are going to be more challenging, right? So, and the biggest challenge is not so much that you would do some kind of harm to the eye from, with the keratoconus. It's really pretty much very unlikely to happen. The biggest challenge is getting the lens to center properly because the eye is sloping in an irregular fashion. But if you have a large lens that can touch down further out, maybe your alignments in that 8 to 10 millimeter, 10.5 millimeter kind of range, as opposed to that 7 to 8.5 kind of range. If you can spread out where that thing is landing, you might be able to bypass that kind of little mild cone altogether. So it really depends on that particular cornea.
Okay. And then Dr. Lee was asking, how would you do the initial fit with this lens if a patient has already been wearing OrthoK of a different brand? Does it matter?
I can answer that because we've gotten
Okay.
a bunch of those cases already. So because we're going off of that height data, and as Dr. Will pointed out, the first point of contact is going to be based upon the width of that optic zone, how far we are out on that cornea. So we could still land and get good alignment. So the trick is obviously what's the back optic zone radius we're going to need to use for that cornea. So I've done this a couple of ways. We've done it where we have a molded cornea where the pattern looks good, and then we have the residual RX that's there. And I've used those two values to come up with that initial design. I think the more reliable one is if we have that initial baseline data, even if it's not Eaglet. So if we have accurate K readings and the accurate initial RX before the patient started wearing, we can use that to design the back optic zone radius. And then based on that, we can use the height data from the map itself when the cornea has been molded to get to the reverse curve, the depth of the reverse curve, and then the alignment curves along those two key meridians. So while it's not ideal, it's certainly manageable.
Okay. And then Dr. Koplos asks, how were you using the lens for dry eye? Was she using the lens often during the day?
That's for Dr. Wolf's case?
Maybe.
So I'll answer that where the best I can. I think how that question is. I think if she's referring, or this person's referring to the case of the dry eye, one that I presented, they were not wearing it during the day. It was an overnight OrthoK. It's just that, I still want her to be comfortable. Basically, if her eyes are really dry and dry even in daily disposables, she's got a dry, sensitive eye. So I just wanted to be mindful of that, try to get the most comfortable lens I could. It's also, again, one of the reasons that they had done OrthoK for like 8 years or something, and stopped because they were ultimately unhappy with OrthoK. So I was, they wanted to get back into it, and I wanted them to have a good experience in the OrthoK with the most comfortable lens possible. I do think that little reservoir that was underneath there does act kind of like a scleral lens and provide some good moisture to the cornea, but it was an overnight lens. Steve mentioned, I think Steve might even sometimes wear his lens during the day, but it probably would be an excellent option for dry eye. I just never daytime wear. I just hadn't tried it.
Yeah, I can chime in on that one. I have, since we got that FDA clearance, it was about 4 months ago now. That's how I started exclusively wearing my lens during the day. I haven't worn it overnight since then. And yeah, I'm a low myop. I'm a -2, but I only wear my lens about 3-4 days a week for maybe 4 or 5 hours. And so when you put it in that perspective, the total hours that I actually have to have a lens on my eye in order to see clearly all the time is about 15, 16 hours in a given week, which is very little wear time. And I think that has really, I actually prefer doing it that way now. The thought of putting my lens on to go to sleep and then wake up in the morning with the lens on my eye, I thought, why would I ever do that? Just put it on in the morning. If I'm at the office, wear while I'm seeing patients, take it off around lunchtime and I'm good to go. And if I'm at home, just put it on for a few hours, whether it be in the evening or the afternoon, take it off, and that's all I have to do. So kind of wear it as an as needed basis. And for a dry eye patient, I think that's a great option.
Okay, we have one other question. One thing I want to note for people in the chat is Elena has posted Dr. Wolf's email in case people want to contact him with questions or about a case. But then the last question is Dr. Bonilla or Bonilla. In one of the cases presented, the one that is monovision, it was fitted monovision, meaning that the myopic and presbyopic patient was fitted with OrthoK lenses in both eyes and be able to see well at distance with one eye and up close with the other, question mark?
Okay, so this is really a good question. So all OrthoK is multifocal, kind of first and foremost, right? Whether it's a hyperopic OrthoK, which would be essentially like a near-centered design going out to the distance, or if it's myopic OrthoK, it'd be like a distance in the middle that kind of progresses out, basically as it goes out to the side. So all OrthoK is going to basically be multifocal. The reason I called this monovision OrthoK was because I made the optic zone so big. So if I move what I'm going to call is the add. So if anybody's not done this, it's a really great way of checking your soft multifocal fits or scleral multifocal fits is to run it like a topographer over top of the lens while they're wearing it, and then you can look especially on your tangent map, your tangential power map. Then you can really see the optics and makes it all make sense. So whether you do monovision or multifocal is really going to depend on how big or small you want the optic zone. So if I were to squeeze that optic zone smaller, then I would have gotten that radiating power change that would have given me essentially a distance-centered multifocal design. But I didn't in this case. I made it bigger because I wanted the optics to be as clear as possible. This patient was like 47. If they were 65 or something, then I might have kept it a little bit smaller to build in some add. But this person really was like, you can leave them half adopter to maybe a 75 uncorrected, and it's going to work perfect. So on that case, yeah, it was multifocal in the sense that all OrthoK is multifocal, but it was monovision in the sense that I made the optic zone really big. And then instead, I just chose to target a little bit less power in the non-dominant eye.
Okay, and then this is the last question. A lot of people have stayed for these questions. Boy, is insertion with NewVision the same as other large diameter GPS, question mark? In other words, saline fully in the bowl.
So, Steve, I want to hear your answer too, but I'll tell you how we do it over here. So, we treat corneal lenses and OrthoK lenses, like your traditional corneal OrthoK, like that we've been using for many years, and all these variety of companies that are out there. We treat OrthoK lenses just like we treat scleral lenses. We use the same solution. We don't use artificial tears to insert the lenses. We use sterile saline. We rinse the front and back of the lens. We fill it up with sterile saline. We put it on the eye, the cleaning solutions. We treat them the same. I'm a big fan of sterile saline with OrthoK because that's a closed environment. So just like a scleral lens, it's a closed reservoir. Therefore, whatever's touching the cornea is bathing against the cornea for many, many hours. So you need preservative-free and sterile. Well, it's the same thing with OrthoK. People kind of forget that is a closed environment where the optic zone is, where that treatment zone is. So likewise, you really want just sterile saline. So as far as all that, it's essentially the same, head position the same. Taking them out, it's obviously a little bit different, with the different types of OrthoK, but I treat it all the same. Now, because this lens is a little bit bigger, it's big enough that if you got a small finger that you might want to use some kind of like a DMV inserter, or maybe like an easy eye kind of ring that attaches to the finger, but it's not that big. So most people's fingers, it can probably balance on more like a soft contact lens or a traditional OrthoK lens. But that's just dependent on that particular person, and so you can hold it on auxiliary kind of device, or you can just use your finger. Taking them out, I always recommend, like for a corneal OrthoK lens or corneal RGP lens, to put like a plunger, or the DMV remover. Plunger is a common terminology, maybe not the best, but kind of straight in at the center, straight through the pupil. If it's a corneo-scleral / translimbal OrthoK, like this NewVision lens, I just have them, hey, just aim for the colored part of your eye. If you got brown eyes, just put it on the brown part. Don't put it on the pupil, but put it on the brown part, put it on the blue part of your eye. And then it comes off, it just goes a little bit towards the periphery. And if they got a scleral lens, then obviously you just work a little bit further out. So it's not as it's not hard to get off like a scleral lens. Like you can use your fingers and get it off. You can use the plunger. It's more like a traditional OrthoK lens in that way, but because it is bigger, it will have a little bit more suction than your regular traditional corneal lens. So it's still probably easier to just use the plunger. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay.
I'll add one thing to that. When removing the lens with a plunger, Dr. Wolf is right. You can blink it out. You can use your fingers, manipulate like a corneal RGP. As you see, there is a little edge lift that comes out that way. If you do prefer the plunger, and one thing that I found is a little more comfortable than applying the plunger, do apply it towards the edge. So like was said, you have to put on the colored portion of the eye, just a little off center of the pupil. And I found rather than just having them pull it straight, because it's always an angle thing, same with a scleral lens. If they have the plunger at the right spot, if they pull at the wrong angle, it's still going to feel like it's suctioned to the eye. So I've been instructing people to put the plunger on the lens and then just slide it side to side, and it just slides right off, and you barely even feel it come off the eye.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Steve, Dr. Wolf. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to share all this knowledge with everybody that attended. We had a large audience tonight from actually all over the world. I spoke too soon about Cyprus. We had people from Nigeria, from way down deep in South America. We had people from the Philippines. So we had a wide audience this evening, in addition to those from the United States. So thank you for your time. Excellent presentation. For those of you that want to contact either company, the data is here on this particular sheet. We'd be happy to hear from you. Dr. Wolf's email is in the chat if you want to contact him directly. And with that, I will wish everybody a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.